There's this theory that I've heard that the one thing the dark forces shouldn't have done, the biggest mistake they made, was to give us access to the internet and to all that mobile phones, to the Telegram groups, the WhatsApp groups, the various different ways that we can communicate below the surface that they were not aware of. And so that when they locked us down, they thought, oh, there we are, we're ever so clever. We've locked everybody down, we've kept them isolated from one another. But in actual fact, all that really happened was that people got online and started to chat and question what was going on. Of course, a lot of people would just sit there in front of Netflix and Amazon Prime or the television mainstream media and just kind of switch off and go, oh, we're being given a bit of furlough money, we'll just put our feet up and take it easy. But others were going, hang on a minute, this does seem a little bit weird. We've never gone through all of this nonsense before. Is it right that this is happening, and who's responsible, and why have we been basically imprisoned in our houses? And so the internet, of course, became the new social area where people would gather. And as a result of that, ideas were started to change around, and people were going, oh, I hadn't thought about that, and videos were being made. And of course, it's given us a certain amount of freedom to have free speech and being able to communicate and that sort of thing, instead of having to meet in village halls and all the old-fashioned ways of doing things. And so the theory, as I said at the beginning, is that that's kind of a bit of a mistake. I think that perhaps these the powers that ought not be, the dark forces, the perpetrators and so forth, thought that we would just sit blindly there in front of the screens being programmed by more mainstream media. And of course, some people did. However, the fear now is that because we've become reliant on this, there is the old switching of the lever down and they just turn it off, you know, at the appropriate moment when it's strategically advantageous for them. And what would happen? What would happen, do you suppose, if the internet goes off? Are we resilient enough to cope? Well, of course, there is a generation, say 30 downwards, who have never really been in the old analogue world. They've been brought up with the internet, they've been brought up with screens, and they wouldn't know what to do. Oh my goodness, my fix, my daily absolutely sitting in front of screens, scrolling and getting the nonsense social media messages and the absolutely rubbish videos that are out there that just tell them all sorts of nonsense and keep them sort of amused, as it were, that sort of dopamine fix. Yes, there'll be those people who will be going, oh, what should we do? But of course, the people that are mostly aware of what great harms have been perpetrated, and the types of people that I see when I'm out at these various gatherings and chats and meetings and discussions, and they've asked me to come and talk, it's amazing to think that actually these people are of a certain age, my age mostly, and a little above. These are the people who remember the analogue days, have the experience of the analogue days, and they know, absolutely, they know that they can cope without the internet. After all, we had radio stations, we had local paper. In the war, for goodness sake, they were sending carrier pigeons with messages on their little legs, secret messages and all of that. When I left school, I went into printing. If you gave me a Multilift 1250 litho printing press, I would still be able to operate it. I remember where you put the ink and where you put the water and where the paper goes in, how to make a paper plate and how to print off. You could print your own newspapers. And I think some of these old-fashioned ways of doing things would immediately spring into action. People would be knocking on doors, talking to one another. People would be meeting in the park, in the down on the coast, in all sorts of areas, in the assembly rooms, in the meeting houses and all of that, in the coffee rooms. You wouldn't be able to stop people. They wouldn't just sit there isolated going, oh, what are we going to do now? They've turned the internet off, therefore we can't communicate. I think they will. The old CB radio would probably be pulled out of the loft. Hello, breaker 1414 and all of that. Preparing for a convoy. Do you remember that film? I think that, and the ham radios, of course, will be out there. We'll see that old technology coming back into use. And that would be the last thing they would really want, because that would be much more tricky for them to monitor. The letters, the post, the written documents, the exchange of hands, the old oak tree with a hole in it that messages are being dropped into. That would be far more difficult for them to look at and keep and monitor and keep an idea of where we're going. They might have their cameras up there, they might have their 5G and all of that nonsense, but the resilience of people, if you didn't have this reliable source of the internet, which is easy for them to sort of keep an eye on what we're doing, and the telephone, the mobile phones with all its spy technology inside it, what would they do? They would have to have a whole manpower that they haven't got going to that oak tree where the messages are being kept, or that old stone on the corner, or that funny house that people are just disappearing in and out and getting their messages from, or stopping all the newspapers or all the various things, or that message that's been put into a book and passed on down the street. They would have a hell of a job to try and stop us from that old-fashioned analog thing. We're creative people. That's what we are, creative beings. And if you just switched off that supply to stop us from doing the sort of things that is easy, that's not going to stop us at all, because suddenly, actually, the creative element would be there. And we'd realise, in many ways, how much more independent we are. Switch off the internet and suddenly we realise, and we'll remember, that we don't need these things, that we can ordinarily get on and do things. We'll get back into our car, we'll go walking and meet up in secret places. Oh yes, it would be a huge mistake for them to turn off the internet. And I do think they know that. And if they don't, they ought to, because even though they might be able to monitor us with the internet, suddenly we would be even more independent and free from them if they were to turn off this one little thing that keeps us all together and able to be monitored. But I'd be interested in your thoughts. Would it worry you if the internet was switched off? Would you find that you would be sitting there going, oh my goodness, what shall I do? I'm not getting my Vobes fix every morning when he does that silly monologue of his, or those wonderful interviews that he does, or all the myriad of other people that you sit and watch on the internet. Perhaps instead you'd start to read books. Perhaps you'd start to have conversations with people. Perhaps you'd go back down to the pubs, or you'd meet in the park, whatever it might be. If they switched off the internet, I think our resilience would be absolute highermost, and we would suddenly go into a better place and a better world in many ways. But I'd be interested in your thoughts.